dangerous. But you have a unique voice. The world needs to hear it.
All right, let's hit this shit.
All right.
All right?
All right.
So, Joe, tell us about Straight Outta Compton and how you wound up as composer of the film.
You know, I had worked with Mike Knobloch and his team at Universal on Oblivion, I guess a couple of years ago now. And so they knew me, and Mike had just seen Earth to Echo and enjoyed it. So I think I was kind of fresh in their memory when Straight Outta Compton come across the plate of the music team at Universal when they were figuring out that they needed to score the film, figuring out a solution on how to score film so challenging, and they invited me to submit a reel. And I was very fortunate that not only did Gary enjoy my reel, which almost, you think of these stories of how composers get projects. It's so rare that you have this shot in the dark kind of send in your music and the director likes it, especially a legendary director like Gary, who's worked with many incredible composers. But then, given my background, my love of hip hop was also a really exceptional coincidence here, where I grew up loving hip hop. It was the first music that I loved, and not many people know this. I don't advertise it. I don't talk about all my past, my past all the time. But so when this film came about, I asked some of the people over at Universal, some of my friends, I said, can I write a personal note to Gary maybe and like tell him about how much I love and respect this music and how I grew up with it? And so I wrote a fairly long email looking back at it, but they were nice enough to pass it along. So it was very important for me to not just take that stab in the dark of, well, here's some music, if you like it, maybe I'll come score your movie. It was, this movie and its subject matter is actually very meaningful to me and something that I care about and something that I will handle with the utmost importance.
So when you speak about Gary, you're talking about the director, Gary
Yes.
Gray. Were you hired before or during shooting? Is there any chance that maybe you actually visited the set?
No, I didn't visit the set, but I was hired right after they wrapped shooting. So when I first got the call to submit a reel, Universal sent me a script so that I love doing that. I love getting really deep into a project as soon as I can so that I could understand the challenges that lay ahead of me and I can immediately start addressing those. So read the script, took a lot of notes, sent in my music, and so by the time I was hired, even though the film was done shooting, I already had a pretty in-depth knowledge of the film. I came to screen it right away, a very early assembly cut, just so I could begin to understand the tone of the picture. And the first thing F. Gary Gray and I did when we met was just start talking about what are the most important themes that need to be addressed by the score.
And when you say themes, you mean sort of story-like themes?
Yes.
People, characters.
Absolutely, yeah.
Scenario.
So like the first one we spoke about was the brotherhood theme, was about how these men had come together, formed this group, and then even though they split apart at a certain point, there is these eternal binds of brotherhood that bring them together. And the important thing for the score was to be able to highlight that throughout the film, throughout the changes from when they were younger, through the formation of NWA, through the challenges of NWA and beyond. And this theme of brotherhood spread not only from the group, but to, for instance, the relationship between Easy and the manager, Jerry. So, the idea of brotherhood being a very a universal musical theme that would represent the theme of brotherhood throughout the film.
With a film about hip-hop, does your music necessarily have to match stylistically the music that we will be hearing from the streets?
I made an immediate decision along with Gary and our music supervisor, Jojo. We all kind of sat down and said, no hip hop in the score. This is not going to be some urban type of score. The score needed to be much more transparent than that. The music really is, I tried to treat the music of NWA as the true star of the film. This is where we're celebrating the legacy of the work of these men. So it was very important not to kind of, clash against that at all, and to make sure to separate myself, because I'm not Dr. Dre. I'm not nearly as good as Dr. Dre, especially at producing hip hop tracks. So I just didn't want to open that door of trying to imitate or trying to present something inauthentic. I felt that if I tried to write a hip hop score, it'd be very inauthentic. Even though I have a great love of hip hop music, that's not what I do. I think, however, that being said, I wanted to make it a point within my music to respect the music of NWA, one being to be transparent, to make sure that my music didn't call too much attention to itself, so that the music of NWA really shone forward. The other thing I did that was really fun was in some of the more fast-paced action sequences where I could be more percussive, I would use some very similar production techniques to Dr. Dre, especially to his early days. So I would, find samples of the drum machines he was using and incorporate that into the score. So it was much, I tried to be not overt about it, very hidden, very subtle, but to at least, show respect for it, to be transparent, to let it shine, but to also, when possible, almost pay homage to that music.
So how would you describe your specific musical palette? What are we going to be hearing when we hear your score in the context of the picture?
It was very important to create something, I tried to create something very warm and intimate, because the music of NWA, the music, when we think of gangster rap, it's very hard, it's very forward, it has a lot of bravado, it has a lot of machismo to it. So I knew that any scenes where there was that sort of emotion going on, it could be covered through songs. I'm not worried about being macho or being big and bold. There were a few scenes where I got to do that, which is great, but my main focus was to focus on the more vulnerable side of these men, because these men do have stories, they have families, they have this friendship, they have this journey that they share together, and it was very important to highlight that, and not through just, Jojo, our music supervisor, and the music team from Universal did a great job illustrating some of those moments through music of the time, like, Parliament, and through the music that they were influenced by. But that being said, where there's moments of emotional depth, we need to kind of dig deeper and create a score that kind of enveloped the audience and brought them into the journey that these men were on.
Did you create the entire score here in your studio, or were there other elements that were necessary?
I love talking about, the palette for any score that I work on, because I think it's one of the things that makes scoring so interesting. I don't have the same musical palette every time I visit my workstation. I try to, immediately the first things I think about, even when reading a script, are what kind of sounds I'm going to use, what kind of instruments. Sometimes something works that I come to the table with, sometimes something unexpected works. So, I came to the table with a lot of kind of warm string ideas, intimate piano, that sort of stuff. And what wound up working even better than all that was guitar. So there's actually a lot of guitar, but not played in a traditional kind of plucky way. It's played usually with an EBow, which is a device that kind of magnetically resonates the string. So it kind of turns the guitar into almost a more traditional string instrument, like a violin. So you're going to be hearing that. You're also going to be hearing, I love playing bass, and having, an electric bass on something adds a great depth to it. And I think ultimately the thing that really made this score shine was our day with strings at Sony. We spent a day with 60 strings. Dr. Dre was there, got to enjoy a scoring session and kind of give some feedback there. It was really an incredible experience to do that in a score where, you've created 90% of it in your studio maybe, and you're alone here, it's dark, it is at night, and you're wondering if this is ever going to see the light of day. And eventually, 60 of the best musicians in the world come together to play the music you've been creating. All of a sudden there's a new life breathed into it just by the fact that someone with 40 years of musical training playing a 200-year-old instrument in a room that is one of the most historic recording studios in the world. There is this magical molecular thing, physical thing happening that imparts a whole new dimension onto the music.
You mentioned Dr. Dre. I know he's one of the producers of the film. Did you have any interaction with him? Did he have some interest in what the score would be like?
Yes, I mean, from the very beginning, from what I heard, I wasn't privy to these meetings, but there were several meetings where, Dr. Dre was involved in talking about the score. So we all knew coming into this that we would have to eventually show the score to Dr. Dre and get feedback. And it was very important to everyone involved to not show the score too soon. I didn't want to be in the situation where I'm asking someone who's an incredible musician, but might not be familiar with the scoring process. I don't want to say, oh, well, this is just a really rough sketch and it's not really to picture, it's kind of, so we didn't want to bring in Andre too soon, but at the same time, we wanted to bring him in soon enough to get some good feedback that we could address, because he is a brilliant musician. So, about a few weeks before our recording date, we brought in Dr. Dre to my studio and played the whole movie front to end for him, with rough versions of the whole score mixed in as best we could, so he could really give us appropriate feedback based on someone watching the story of his own life as well as being a musician. So that session is something that I'll always remember, because here's an incredible musician spending time with me in my studio, giving me feedback and advice and help, and kind of just, I don't know, it's just someone since when I was a child that I've looked up to and respected. It was really an incredible evening.
Was it nerve-wracking or was it exciting?
It was nerve-wracking at first, but Dr. Dre is someone who understands his role in the industry, and he carries himself with a lot of humility and kindness and compassion. So he made everyone feel at ease immediately. So there was I wasn't scared. I was scared before he got here, and once he got here, he was incredibly gracious and kind.
I presume that most of your collaboration was with director Gary Gray. What was that process like?
I was very nervous about working with Gary, because he has worked with so many composers. He has worked on so many legendary films that I've seen and love, especially something like The Italian Job or Friday. So that was yet another point in the process where I was nervous going in to meet Gary, my first playback with him, how he would react to the first music. And what he immediately did that set me at ease was just kind of start talking to me like, as an artist. And rather than, like he's just a boss or something telling me what to do, just immediately start talking on the creative end of things, what I was trying to express in music. And, I find that his instinct is so good that I really want to try to get fresh music in front of him first before anyone else, so I could get his kind of raw reaction to it, because I usually found that was the right reaction. Whatever, if he said, oh, I like it, but try this, or I don't like this, or I like this, like that sort of immediate reaction was really great, because he has so much experience behind the camera working with other composers. He knows how to listen, how to give direction musically, and so I love. Once we got past that ice-breaking point, I was so comfortable working with Gary.
You're someone who is known in town as having had successful collaborations with high-profile artists on movies. Like you worked with Daft Punk on the Tron Legacy movie, you worked with M83 on Oblivion. Did those experiences help or contribute in any way to the success of this one?
Absolutely. The collaborative background I have is something that I don't take lightly. It's something that the fact that I've been in the room with amazing people like Daft Punk and M83 and Moby, and they've trusted me to become a caretaker of their music, so to speak, when working with picture. I mean, that's something that I do not take for granted at all. It's something that it's like, wow, these people have not only am I fans of them and I respect their music, but they are folding me into their own process and giving me a certain amount of respect, and especially with their time and energy and secrets. It's always fun to learn with these artists. But I think the most important thing to take away from that is the idea of what collaboration is, not just with another musical artist, but with other filmmakers. And so whenever I talk to younger film composers or people who are just starting out, I talk about the importance of just getting into a room with a student filmmaker or a choreographer or another musician or a band or a producer, and just being exposed to working with other people, because this is such a people-oriented job. On any one project, I'm going to have in this studio everyone from directors to producers to music supervisors to film executives to assistants to music editors, to all the way down the road. I'm always interacting with people and dealing with expectations and demands and delivery and whatnot. So I think the idea of collaborating with musical artists has really helped me collaborate with filmmakers and collaborate with artists of any other kind, whether it's me solely as composer or me collaborating with another composer or artist. It's always a challenge to kind of figure out the person dynamic and to figure out how you could fit in and make things as best you can.
Are you an intuitive composer, or do you take a cooler, more intellectual approach to what needs to happen in a score?
I try to start intellectually so that when I get into the moment of composing, I can be more, I can feel it out a little bit more and be more intuitive. So I try to establish, as I write, as I'm beginning the research and development process of a project, say I'm reading the script or visiting the set, I'm trying to create boundaries and, color. These are the colors I'm going to use. These are instruments. These are, I'm being very I am being more intellectual about it and thinking about connecting, arcing a theme throughout a score, throughout a movie. But when push comes to shove, I just need to get in front of the computer. Hopefully I've set up the boundaries, and really just let my ideas flow. And I find that that's the best way, so that I create the environment for me to operate in, and then I can move within it freely.
Will we recognize themes in your score when we see the film, or is it really more of a mood thing or a textural thing that you've been able to accomplish that you thought was effective?
You'll definitely recognize themes. It's the score is very textural, the score is very moody, but there is a very distinct Brotherhood theme that I try to, it's not a theme that's a very notey theme. It's something that is a lot more moody and just kind of carries and lifts the viewer throughout a scene. It's a very long theme, so you might, each time it appears, you might just hear it once, just one long statement, and it's very floating. But really the goal was to be that invisible, so that we'd have a thematic element, yet still maintain the clarity for the story to build without being pushed by the score.
How much of your music is in the final film?
I think there's about 35 minutes in the film, and it's always funny to look at, the final tally on these films. I think, something like Oblivion was 110 minutes. The Raid is something like 60 minutes. This is 35, and you always look at it and you look at the amount of music that you've written and that you've produced, and it's always far more. So I think, we wrote and recorded maybe about 60 minutes of music for this film, and for something like Oblivion or Insurgent, we're that needs 100 minutes of score, so we're always producing at least 2 hours and 20 minutes of music, but because you need that coverage, you need to be able to be flexible with an edit as the picture is changing.
Are there any general rules about scoring a film that apply to every project, regardless of genre?
Oh, that is a great question. I think the rule that applies is that the answers are in the picture. I never. That's one thing I worry about, or that's one thing I love about film scoring, is that I don't have to sit here worrying about answers to questions, because I usually find the answers to those questions in the film, and so it's kind of heartbreaking at first, because what winds up happening is you go down a rabbit hole of like, oh, I love this thing I'm writing, this is great, I'm making it, oh, it's a memorable theme, whatever, and then you put it on picture and you say, this doesn't work. No matter how much you try to shoehorn it in and say, no, I'm going to make it work, ultimately the picture is going to tell you, no, this isn't working. So what I find great about that is it's a very democratic process, in the sense that, yes, I always listen to my filmmaker, but if it's a good filmmaker like Gary or like Joe Kosinski or Robert from the Insurgent series, these guys they're worrying about the film first and foremost. There's no ego involved. There's like, is this helping the film? And so I find that everything else changes, instrumentation, writing process, how big or small your team is, which studio or which production company you're working with. Everything changes, so most rules go out the window when starting a new picture. But the one that remains the same is it really is, the film is king. Understanding how to work within picture, how to work with dialogue, how to work with the types of sequences that are being put in front of you. That's there, and it's comforting to me because, like I said, the answers are there. I don't have to worry about coming up with them.
How would you summarize the experience of working on Straight Outta Compton?
It was definitely one of the most challenging experiences of my career so far because the star of the movie is the music of NWA. So how does score exist? And so it's hard to summarize this whole experience, this whole journey we've been on. But really, it's been about finding a voice for these characters outside of gangster rap, and I think that is really the biggest challenge for me, because their music, because their characters, their persona, their lives are so big and influential, that to then find the flip side of what these characters are like when they're not being so powerful, when they're more vulnerable. So that was a huge challenge. This project, front to end, was a challenge, and not a bad one. It was an amazing challenge, and something that I learned so much from because of that, and because of the people involved who helped me through. It was really an incredible challenge.
That's great. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you, John.
We can keep going, man. We can take over the goddamn world.
I'm coming straight out of Compton.